would have thought that Kirby would work so well on 3D? Everyone. Literally everyone. Why it took so long? Well, to be honest, it took so long because it's not easy to convert 2D gameplay to 3D. In a fascinating recent interview, the developers of Kirby and the Forgotten Lands shared some of the challenges that emerged when they put the pink puffball in a 3D space. For example, look at this video. Kirby's attack should connect, right? Well, not actually. The perspective is fooling you. The developers are correct in that, making sure that the player doesn't get frustrated. That's awesome. Now, imagine all the problems that different franchises from different genres face when they are making the conversion. It's a complicated process and we saw many that didn't manage to get it right. However, I want to highlight in this video the best conversions from Nintendo in that department. The games that managed to tame the wild 3D space doing everything necessary for it. Of course, the ranking on this list is only my opinion, okay? With that in mind, let's go! Okay, I'm aware that this is a strange one to begin with, but I genuinely think it's a great example for this video. The original Excitebike is an early NES game designed by none other than Shigeru Miyamoto himself. It always impressed me how many mechanics we have here. The first time playing it, I assumed it was a very simple racing game with some slopes here and there to give it a twist. But then someone told me that I should pay attention at how I was landing with the bike to not lose momentum. And I was like, what? Not only that, but there's a boost attached to a hit system. If I use it too much... If that's not enough yet, we have collisions, so avoid being on the same track as your opponents. Anyway, it's a very nuanced gameplay style for the NES, but it still is an arcade game that I personally wouldn't expect to see a sequel. However, in 2000, Nintendo released Excitebike 64, developed by Left Field Productions. Surprisingly enough, the sequel managed to bring all the elements that made the original special. Slopes, the overheat system, bike control in the air, and the collisions. All those same elements are now presented in a 3D space. And honestly, they work wonders. It feels like a natural evolution. It's the classic Excitebike experience taking advantage of the third dimension, with elements like the camera behind the bike, the easiness to freely move in space, and a variety of tracks with different layouts and hidden paths. And from a more general point of view, I think the devs got it right by bringing a more realistic approach. Of course, the original was relatively simple, but many of its mechanics tried to simulate a real physics. And in 3D, that feeling can be amplified with more nuanced controls and physics. Basically, they understood the original game essence and doubled down on that. Even after Excitebike 64, the series received more sequels, with Excite Truck being one of my favorite experiences on Wii. A ridiculous, over-the-top and incredibly fun racing game that I can talk more about in a future video. I get the impression that Kid Icarus on NES was a little ahead of its time. With a great variety to the gameplay and some light RPG elements, it's an experience that provides a good amount of variety and really values the feeling of progression. Now, I'm not a fan of the game, personally speaking, because it's a kind of gameplay that never hooked me, but I can recognize its merits. Well, during the development of a third-person shooter for the 3DS, Sakurai decided to use this already existent but kinda forgotten Nintendo franchise. Because of that late decision and the huge gap between the last game, Kid Icarus Uprising seems almost unrelated to the other two games in the franchise. Actually, it feels more like a reinvention, a way to translate some of the primitive aspects of the original experience to a 3D space. Elements from Kid Icarus on the NES like weapon upgrades, gameplay variety have been turned it up to 11. In some levels Pete is flying, in others he is walking, and the gameplay changes drastically between both styles. We have an epic story to follow with tons of in-game dialogues. It's a frenetic game that always catches your attention. Probably the best part is the level of customization allowed, with many different weapons and upgrades. You can even customize the difficulty with a very creative system of risk and reward. I really like Uprising. I think it's a unique experience, very well crafted, and one of the most impressive games on the 3DS. However, the reason why it is relatively low on this list are the controls. At launch, I had fun playing this game and I could ignore the problems with controls. But revisiting it right now, it's kinda insane. Even though it's nice to have precise aiming with the styles, sometimes you feel genuine pain playing in long sessions. This is the reason why I would love to see an HD port. 2 analogs or even motion controls could be an easy fix to the only thing that brings the experience down. Well, I hope we can see that on Switch in the future. Oh, the obvious one. Alright, if the main criteria here was how influential the conversion was, this would be the first place without a doubt. Super Mario 64 is not a simple conversion to 3D. Nintendo was bold enough to recreate Mario almost from the ground up so the experience could work perfectly in these new environments. Changing the whole focus from 2D linear levels to amazing 3D sandboxes was not only a revolution for the Mario franchise, but for the whole gaming world. Looking back at the elements that 64 abandoned, like the power-up system or the goal pole objective at the end of the level, it really shows how different of an experience it is. And they managed to get a lot of things right in such an early stage. How they had the idea to give acrobatic movements to Mario. They could do something simple like, I don't know, add a double jump. But no, Mario's movement is at the same time complex, useful and fun. Perfect to use in that environment. Beyond that, we have the dynamic camera system, the castle as a hub, Mario's punch, tons of new things created specifically to solve three-dimensional problems. The truth is, Mario 64 feels more like a great tech demo for what developers could do on a 3D space than a proper sequel to Super Mario World. And I'm not even mad! Mario is iconic because of the impact that he caused in the industry in 1985. Recreate another impact entering the 3D era was precisely the right move for the series. On a side note, it's fascinating that years and years after that, Nintendo released Super Mario 3D Land and 3D World, two games that were basically what a conventional conversion from 2D Mario would look like, including power-ups, linear levels, world map, and everything else. It's a blessing that we have both styles at the end of the day, and it also shows the different approaches to a 2D to 3D conversion. Zelda, I think, is on a similar level to Mario on how influential it was. I'm putting it a little higher because with the benefits of a couple more years in development, Ocarina of Time ended up being an incredibly polished and ambitious game. I can't say that Ocarina changed the Zelda series as much as Mario 64 changes Mario, because in fact, a lot of the reasons why Ocarina is such a solid experience are directly related to A Link to the Past. The big challenge here was to make the players visualize in 3 dimensions an awesome, epic adventure like the ones in A Link to the Past, with big areas, mountains, forests, castles and everything else. And Ocarina succeeded very well. The scenarios are huge. Hyrule is finally realized in the way that fans and the developers always imagine. An epic story can be told in that world with cinematic scenes full of different camera angles, powered by an amazing soundtrack. I can only imagine how it was to experience this in 1998. Well, actually, I think Ocarina aged pretty well in general. I played for the first time in 2010 and my mind was completely blown. It's an experience really well realized. Not only in the epic department, but imagine how complicated it was to create dungeons in 3D for the first time. And they were very bold, using the verticality to the fullest. The infamous Water Temple is a great example, creating puzzles with the water level. Maybe they've gone a little too far with this one, but nonetheless impressive. Ocarina of Time is the Star Wars A New Hope for video games and will probably always be remembered as a huge jump in the spectacle department. I'm a huge Metroid fan. I love the feeling of satisfaction that I have exploring alien places as the mightiest bounty hunter in the galaxy. However, for a long time I've only played the amazing 2D games, from the first one to Fusion and now Dread. I love them all. I was curious about the Prime series, but the first person perspective was a real bummer to me. I don't know, I have this claustrophobic feeling with these games. Recently I decided to finally play the series because it's Metroid and everyone say it's great. And well, Thank God I did that. It's been a while since I had so much fun with video games. Metroid Prime is a delight since the beginning, when you realize how smooth the controls are. I can't believe that I resisted to play something so delicious to control. In the moments that I started exploring the planets of Tallon 4, I noticed how the first-person perspective was perfect for Metroid. It's not only about shooting, as I thought it would be, it's about exploring, as any other mainline Metroid. You are literally inside Samus' helmet, looking at all the information available, seeing the world in the most immersive perspective possible. What impressed me the most and made me put this here in the best position is that Retro Studios made what I would consider a perfect conversion. A conversion that elevated every single aspect from the 2D games to a new level, thanks to the 3D perspective. Exploration, combat, puzzle, everything evolved here. At the moment, not only am I a huge fan of the first-person perspective, but I'm also really happy that they abandoned the initial idea of making this game a third-person shooter. Visually speaking, Prime looks ridiculously different from the 2D Metroids, but the feeling that it conveys when you play it is exactly the same. It's the original vision that Sakamoto had on the NES, now on 3D. That's a huge achievement, and I completely understand all the praise that Retro Studios receives for this series. Maybe I did this whole video just to talk about Metroid Prime, but don't let anyone know about that. Well, that's my top 5 for best conversions that Nintendo ever did from 2D to 3D. 2 franchises ended up not appearing here on the list, Pokémon and Donkey Kong. For Pokémon, although the 3D upgrades was something big, it didn't change a lot in the gameplay department. We are now seeing an evolution with games like Legends Arceus and the newly announced Scarlet and Violet. For Donkey Kong, well, I never played Donkey Kong 64, and I would've guessed that it is not the definitive version of a 3D Donkey Kong. That's something that I would love to see Nintendo do in the future, just like what is happening with Kirby right now. And that's it from me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye!